attending this press conference. Next week in the UAE, the Conference of Parties would start its work. And Guyana, no, I don't need that. Yeah, just, I don't know who asked him to bring me a document. So we have been in the public domain on several occasions outlining our position that we will take at COP. Last week we met with the international community in Guyana, and we spoke at length about what our positions are, and we sought to solicit their support in moving the issues that are important to Guyana and the Caribbean forward. The position of CARICOM is well known. CARICOM has focused largely on raising ambitions because of the existential threat to the region. It has focused on adaptation funding and funding for loss and damage in Maine. These are the key issues for CARICOM. In Guyana's case, we have focused more on supporting CARICOM, but some new dimensions because of the large forests that we have. We have argued that there should be the right incentives globally to preserve forests, and that there should be a just transition in the global arena. So we explained all of these positions to the diplomatic corps and how we intend to pursue this at COP. We also gave an extensive outline of the low carbon development strategy and the benefits that the low carbon development strategy and the funds earned through that strategy will bring to indigenous communities and the country as a whole. So just to repeat a bit of what I've already spoken of, that the first tranche of the sale of 30% of our forest carbon, which yielded $750 million at a minimum, and we say at a minimum because if it's traded in secondary markets, we share 60% of the upside. That of that $150 million, $22.5 million was given to 242 Amerindian communities, $5 million to the GFC, and $122.5 million remain in a bank account to be used for adaptation funding. We have already isolated several or developed several projects, largely to manage water and to both from the sea and from flooding, and these will be implemented shortly. Of the 242, the $22.5 million that were given to the Amerindian communities, we now have 500 projects on the implementation funded from this source. And all 242 Amerindian villages have submitted their village sustainability plan. You would recall that to get a buy-in at the village level, when we met with the two shows, we insisted that they would have to have the minutes of the meeting held at the village to approve the plan, along with an attendance record of the participants in the village, the villagers, to show a buying at the level of the village, consistent with the principle of free, prior, informed consent. And that the projects must be carefully monitored. So we have a finance and monitoring committee in each village. But these projects, I must say, are making a huge difference to the 500 projects to these villages, and they're implemented by the villagers themselves, by the leadership in the village, and it's lending a lot to building capacity for managing funds at the villages. And this is just the first tranche. So we've had great success in intermediating these funds quickly. You would recall the mechanism that we used in the past when we had the agreement with Norway and we were working on building a model for forest carbon globally, that we used a different body to intermediate those funds. That is the IFIs. And the difficulties we have had with getting those funds to communities and being used for the purpose either of adaptation, sustainability, or green job creation. We are yet to utilize a lot of those funds, although, for example, the 85 million was deposited in the IDB maybe some 13 years ago. And we're yet to utilize those funds. We're now using them. We've just gone out for a project on solar panels. So our argument to the international community is that you just can't have funding for these initiatives, but you have to pay attention to the mechanism for getting the funds to the recipients, that it is a mechanism fit for purpose, and that it should lend to building capacity in communities themselves. And we have demonstrated this through this arrangement now, because we have changed that mechanism. All the funds will be placed in an account that is under our national jurisdiction, but audited by international audit firms and presented to our parliament to see that the funds are secured. So we've changed the model a bit, and because of that change in the model, we have had 500 projects in 1 year on the implementation, when it took us sometimes 2 or 3 projects from the international community 13 years to get implemented. Look at the ICT project that we set aside $17.2 million under the first LCDS funds. We're still implementing that through the UNDP. We have spent on administrative funds alone, almost at one point in time, 20% of the disbursed funds went to administration. In this case, it's a different model. So we have some great experiences to take to COP. We made the argument that forests, as I did the last time we met here, I think maybe a few press conferences back, that forests cannot be saved by philanthropy. We have gone past that model. It's an important abatement solution to climate change. You cannot achieve net zero without tackling a key source of emission, which is forests and land degradation. And it is not getting the required attention because it's not part of forest carbon, is not part of a compliance market. We have to return, there are no public funds now, particularly ODA, being at scale dedicated to saving forests. And we don't expect any to be made available given how adaptation funding has fared globally, because it suffered from lack of funding. So we don't expect that public money will be going into trying to preserve forests globally. So we have to work at stimulating a market-based mechanism to do that. We had this conversation maybe 10, 15 years ago, and we had a momentum around it, but it was killed by many international NGOs, although they say they want to preserve forests. And since then, we have lost that momentum that is trying to get for market-based mechanism to compete against or outcompete alternate use for forests. And what has happened? Since we lost that momentum, now what has replaced it? At Glasgow, we had the leaders pledging to end deforestation by 2030, but with no money there. So they're catering on the goodwill of countries. That's not going to happen. We made it clear that forest carbon has additional benefits, the biodiversity, ecosystem benefits, and yet there is no market for it. There is no financial incentive for forest carbon, but there are great incentives for other types of carbon in the compliance markets globally, traded closely to 80 euros now per ton in the EU ETS. So part of our struggle is to get Article 6 to move forward at COP, which is market-based mechanism. And the second struggle is to get forests to be part of a compliance market. Only then can we create the right sort of incentives globally to save the forest, which is a key abatement solution. And therefore, the president would be leading when we'd have a side event at COP. The president has to return to Guyana because of the impending referendum in Venezuela. He'd come back here before that referendum. He wants to be here for the referendum, but he will be at COP the first couple of days next week to ensure that we try to bring the conversation back to what it takes globally to preserve forests, to return to those conversations we had maybe 10 years back, and to place forests as one of the key solutions in a part of a menu to approach to getting to net zero by 2050. Forests as having to play a central role in that. You have heard also our approach that in part of the just transition that we argued for, that if you do what some NGOs want and some have been calling for, including from the UN, that is to ban new investments in fossil fuel production, you will retain a monopoly for the existing producers, and countries like Guyana, Suriname, maybe in Africa, they would never be able to develop their resources in this sector. If you want a just transition, we have to ensure that the biggest polluters and the worst pollutants come out of the supply chain earlier, which is coal. And second, so that the solution to getting to net zero has to be not total reduction in fossil fuel production, particularly in the face of growing global demand for energy, but some reduction in fossil fuel production, particularly coal and some of the most polluting forms of fossil fuel. The next is to create an incentive through a carbon price to introduce renewable energy at scale so they can displace the growth of demand for energy without having to supply it from fossil fuel production. The third element has to be some demand management. Fourth element, use of technology. And then the fifth element has to be reducing deforestation and land degradation. We believe if you do all five of these things, then you can achieve net zero without pushing the world through hardships or that will come out of unilateral action, particularly with fossil fuel if you just displace fossil fuel immediate now. This is our approach at COP, will be our approach at COP. We intend, as you know, to pursue these views vigorously. And we have a good example. We're one of the few countries that are in the world today that has a low carbon development strategy. We have the biggest forestry deal in the world, from a market-based deal. We have a robust and good quality carbon. We have the only international jurisdictional certification for our forests. So we go to COP with great credibility. We go to COP there too as an emerging oil producing country, but one that still supports a reduction in global fossil fuel subsidies, production subsidies. We go to COP with a call for early decarbonization. We believe in new technology that should reduce the carbon footprint of activities in the oil and gas sector, apart from the fact that we produce light sweet crude here, which is less polluting than the heavy crude oil produced in this region, in many countries in this region, and globally. The new FPSOs have a 30% less carbon footprint than the earlier ones. We have instituted a carbon-related tax on flaring, and we have a no flaring policy. So we are going there with a strong credential. And given that our forests sequesters 154 million tons of carbon per annum, even with our maximum oil production in Guyana, we would not be using up 20% of that allowance, basically. So we will still be a carbon negative country, even with us with a maximum production of oil. At the national level, we are moving to decarbonize, increase the power output, but decarbonize our energy sector. A 70% reduction we're aiming for in emissions. So we go with great credibility because we're doing things on the ground. We have not waited for international funding to tackle adaptation issues here. We are finding our own sources to tackle adaptation. Some countries, unfortunately, don't have the assets we have, like in the rest of the region. That's why we act in strong solidarity with them to see that the monies that are pledged are delivered. And one point we made also to the donors and the international community to say back to their capitals that we expect that there will be some consistency in the accountability for climate funds. Because when the pledge was made in Copenhagen, it was 100 billion a year of new money, not displacing ODA, and two, that it would be mainly in the form of loans, grants. Now, most of this money is coming in the form of loans, and it has displaced ODA. We dealt with this issue already. I'm just reiterating it, so that the international community needs to have some credibility. And if you go to 4 different donors, they all have different classifications of climate funds. And so you have a big range of numbers about between pledges and the commitment that they made, the actual disbursement. So there has to be great level of accountability. We have to have a mechanism to ensure that the international community does this. and that the original principle, the Kyoto principle, must work particularly with small countries. That these countries with the least capacity to deal with the consequences of climate change, for which they had no contribution to, that they must be assisted in adapting or going on to a sustainable pathway that is in terms of supply of renewable energy for their societies. So we're going to be, it's inconvenient sometimes to bring up a lot of these arguments, because when the international community keeps pushing equal burden sharing, sometimes you look like an outlier. But we don't want free money. We just want what is just and what was pledged already. And it's not like the Caribbean countries are asking for this. We've moved beyond that. We are not, some of the agencies that are intermediating small climate funds, the bureaucratic approach to accessing this money overwhelms the capacity of many countries. So we have even started shutting ourselves out of those and utilizing our own resources plus the money earned through our own initiatives to tackle adaptation. Because we're now hopeful that the money will come soon. But it doesn't mean that we're going to be dumbing down our voices globally in support of the other countries that need this now, especially the Caribbean and small island states. So we will be focusing on some of these issues at COP. So there has been a huge concern in our country, given Venezuela's aggressive positions on our border. And their entire campaign, historically, but more recently, has been based on misinformation and lies. It boggles my mind that seemingly sensible people would choose to be so ignorant about historical facts, facts that are well documented. It's either they have chosen to be ignorant, as I said before, or are conveniently using the misinterpretation to serve a political aim. And personally, I believe it is a combination of the two. So what is clearer than Venezuela complaining to the United States of America that the United Kingdom was trying to, in the 19th century, was trying to take over too much of its territory. The United Kingdom, the United States practically ignored them at the beginning, and then forced the United Kingdom to submit itself to arbitration, acting as a champion for Venezuela at that time, consistent with the Monroe Doctrine, the same imperialist doctrine that they today complain about. They forced the United Kingdom to go to arbitration to settle the matter definitively. A tribunal was put together to the satisfaction of all the parties, and the tribunal made a ruling. Venezuela accepted the ruling, and consistent with that ruling, demarcated the boundaries or borders between the two countries. For 60 years, over 60 years, those borders remain unchanged until they raised a false allegation that there was some corruption at the tribunal. Now, after that, the Geneva Agreement was signed. So when they say that, like the Vice President of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, saying they've never accepted this boundary and that the Essequibo always belonged to them. It's a blatant lie. For over 60 years, they accepted this. Their stamps were issued, a whole range, maps, stamps, etc., showing Guyana as it is now, our current map, and Venezuela, the boundaries as the existing boundaries. And these were issued by the state of Venezuela. But that's an inconvenient truth to the Maduro government. So then they falsely claim that the Geneva Agreement overtook the 1899 final arbitral award. And that's another falsehood too. The Geneva Agreement dealt with the controversy arising from their claim that the award was flawed. It was never recognized by Guyana or anyone else that the 1899 award was flawed. They claim that. And that is what was supposed, the controversy arising from their claim that the 1899 award was flawed, should have been dealt with through the good offices process that we explored for a very long time, decades. And then when it was not yielding any result, the Secretary General of the United Nations decided that he will choose a remedy that is provided for by the Geneva Agreement, which was to refer the matter to the ICJ. And that is where we are today. What is clearer than that? So, Venezuela, first of all, claimed that the ICJ didn't have any jurisdiction. And once they failed, they went to the court, argued that case, and they failed that on that issue. The ICJ ruled overwhelmingly that it had jurisdiction to deal with this controversy. Now they're at the stage where they have to submit their memorandum to show now that the award was actually flawed, the 1899 award. But I suspect they have zero, nothing to show that. They have a weak case. Absolutely nothing. They can't show that this award was fraud, except for a dead man's letter, who was a junior lawyer attached to the tribunal. So this is a serious court. You have to present and argue your case. They know they have a weak case, and therefore they want to choose another mechanism. This referendum that they have is now, the Article 3 of the referendum is to now deny the jurisdiction of the ICJ, because they don't want, for heaven's sake, to have to present this case now, because we know it's going to be a weak case. And then two, to have another means outside of this peaceful means provided for by the Geneva Agreement to resolve the controversy definitively. They want to chose Article 5 to put to their people, which is basically to annex our territory. So a measure that is aggressive and not peaceful. So Guyana has always been in favor of a peaceful solution to this controversy. We've acted as good neighbors with Venezuela. We've acted in consort with the international community. We have the solidarity of the world on this issue. The CARICOM, the Commonwealth, the OAS, including the two parties that were the main parties at the tribunal when it was set up, the United States of America and the United Kingdom. Both have said that the 1899 award is, and the results there, the award was final. So who I see calls about peace in the region? We've never threatened the peace. Venezuela has been an aggressive country threatening peace. They like to politically blame imperialism and everything else for their woes. They would blame the United States of America, and I think it's part of campaigning and showing up their base to have an outside foe to fight against so you can mobilize your base. But we have never threatened any country. Venezuela has threatened our border. They've threatened to annex our territory. They've threatened to leave the peaceful means of settling this border issue, which is the ICJ, which is in most civilized countries and in a civilized world, that's what people do. They've chosen unilaterally to repudiate the 1899 award and then try to paint themselves as victims. Oh, Guyana, falsely that Guyana is setting up an American base to invade them. They keep telling everyone that. Up to yesterday, the defense minister at the South American Defense Conference in Brazil said that we are setting up an American military base to invade them. But it's nonsense. It's nonsense. They've always done that to create this victimhood at home. Now, I believe this campaign is also political. I've seen the vile rhetoric from Delcia Rodriguez. Vile, vile, vile rhetoric. Calling calling President Ali names and saying you're ashamed to the people of Caribbean with your drag submission to the imperial powers. We're not afraid of him ever. We're sons and daughters of Simon Bolivar and the libertarian sword. nonsense. And I think Delcia Rodriguez cannot speak with such certainty when you talk about providing food for people or jobs for them, because you have thousands of people fleeing their country. So this gives them a beautiful platform to campaign ahead of the elections that they have in Venezuela. So hoping to maybe mobilize support around a seemingly national issue. But they can't say that with the same sort of flourish that she does this and a flair when she speaks about these matters. And it's all rhetoric. Simon Bolivar was fighting against major imperial powers, not trying to bully a smaller country. Simon Bolivar, they claim they're proponents and defenders of Simon Bolivar. And really, they're ashamed to Simon Bolivar and what he stood for, and the freedom for oppressed people and in this region. And even Chavez, they're Chavistas. Chavez himself said Maduro might have been here with him when he came to Guyana. And he said this was an imperialist, the border issue was an imperialist invention, the conflict between Guyana. So we're going to address this matter more extensively. But I believe now that this is a lot of posturing in Venezuela, that we are part of in the pockets of ExxonMobil. But I think it's a kind of greed too. They've seen the successes in our oil and gas industry. Our production is set to overtake theirs. A big country that had a thriving oil and gas sector that they destroyed, much to the detriment of their people. And it's a kind of jealousy too. And they blame ExxonMobil. But Exxon, another shareholder in this consortium, is a Chinese company, a substantial shareholder. They've had Chevron for over maybe 100 years in Venezuela. So talking about imperialist companies operating in your country, it's all nonsense and rhetoric. And, lying to the ICJ. They presented one slide with President Ali saying he was an aggressor because he went to Essequibo Coast to address an annual activity we have there, Essequibo Night, which is not a new thing. He was wearing his Mao suit. He came back from China. He got a Mao suit in China. He wore it several times, not to go to Essequibo alone. I've seen him in different color Mao suits at different places because he just came back from China. They gave it to the ICJ. They presented a slide. The president has worn a military uniform to threaten them. Lies. Lying to the ICJ. If you look at it, it's not a military uniform. Secondly, she's lied to the ICJ again about the mistreatment of Venezuelans. Look at the reports coming out of the UN. I don't want to, on the IOM, about treatment of Venezuelans here. We have condemned xenophobia. Here, we have argued for fair treatment of Venezuelans. We have acknowledged that the majority of the Venezuelans who have come back and fled oppression and hunger in Venezuela, that the majority of them have Guyanese blood because they fled oppression here in Guyana sometime in the past. We've established that. We've been treating people fairly here in this country, but she lied again to the ICJ. so it's based on a series of lies, and I think it serves their political interests. And I hope that the opposition in Venezuela, if they urge people to vote on Article 3, which is to repudiate the jurisdiction of the International Court. This is the same group that seeks help globally when they claim that democracy is under threat in Venezuela. And so if they want to vote to repudiate international law, or to say they don't accept international law, they're playing right into the hands of the government on this. This is a major issue, and I hope that they will not be duped. And what sort of referendum? Venezuelan politicians are saying already, what referendum? This is already, this is part, 2/3 of our territory, part of your map already. You teach this in school. What victory will you get at a referendum? What sort of victory will you get at a referendum? You've been telling people this falsely. You've been lying to them over the years. What do you expect them to do? They will say yes, that this is part of our country, because you've been teaching them this lie for all the years. So whether the referendum goes forward or not, because we are waiting on the ruling on provisional measures from the ICJ. So, but they've already said today that the referendum will go ahead. We're still awaiting that ruling. They've said to the ICJ, the lawyer said, Venezuela will not invade Guyana. We give you that assurance. Maduro has been saying this to CARICOM countries, the CARICOM leaders. But when you listen to Delcia Rodriguez, you wonder if Maduro is just using her to carry this aggressive line. You can never be sure. She talks about, like, next week they'll be in Guyana. But if she thinks that we will roll over as Guyana and succumb to their imperialist ambitions in Guyana, then they're false. The international community stands by this. I don't know if they're miscalculating based on what happened in Crimea and the other places, but it would be a grave miscalculation on their part. Now, we've never been interested in having military bases here, but we have to protect our national interests. And so at the diplomatic level, through the ICJ, we have been working openly because we are a law-abiding country. We're a democratic country. Can't say the same thing about Venezuela. And we will continue to do so. And we are interested in maintaining peace in our country and on our borders. But we are going to be working with our allies to ensure that we plan for all eventualities. And I know that we're going to be working on greater defense cooperation with a number of countries. We would have from the U.S. Department of Defense next week 2 visits to Guyana by 2 teams, and then several other visits in the month of December, and high-level presence, representation from the Department of Defense here. We are not going to succumb to Venezuela's bullyism. They can do it. People say to us, oh, they're doing this because of the internal politics, etc. We can't just think that this is internal politics without taking all possible measures to protect our country, including working with others. And all the options available to us to defend our country will be pursued. Every option. We're not an aggressive power, as has been demonstrated by our track record. We're a small country. We put a lot of our faith in international law and diplomacy, and we have had great successes in this regard. But we have to ensure that we also protect our country against the lies and the campaign of misinformation peddled by Venezuela. They just, every part of the world, you would think that the 1899 tribunal never existed. And no matter how much we push, then they still carry that on. Now nationally, I think we should, whilst we have to approach this matter seriously, and we have to allay the fears of many of our people, we can't be paranoid too. And we must not spread rumors and see that they're to score political points. Now, we have seen, again, in spite of the explanations I gave last week, not wanting to make that issue a political issue about what was offered to Venezuela in the past. This claim that I offered a channel to the Atlantic. Last press conference, we saw where the claim came from. It was under Desmond Hoyt. Mr. Scotland, as part of the good officers process, discussed this. It doesn't undermine our case at the ICJ. It didn't repudiate the 1899 award. But on last Sunday's program with Marvin Williams, he repeated it. That was just Sunday last on Nation Watch. He repeated the claim that I made this offer again. And then, I play for you what Cathy Hughes said 2 days ago.
We got to be worried because the vice president himself, and you all see him on the little TikTok clips, the vice president himself was giving Venezuela a channel, he called it.
This is Cathy Hughes. Now, she's a leader of the AFC. They say one thing nationally, and I must say that Mr. Norton stayed away from this when he was interviewed by that Marvin Williams. He stayed away from all of this nonsense. But he could have easily, because he knew otherwise to say that's not true. Jagdeo didn't promise that. And now Cathy Hughes went to the people in Linden. She was upset because he had a public meeting and 3 persons turned up. So that is her saying that I promised them again. This is the rumor mongering among people who are willing, because they hate the PPP or maybe me so much, that they're prepared to compromise even more our border. And from someone, a lowlife like Cathy Hughes, who just came out, who used to award contracts to herself, to her own company in her own ministry when she was minister. And she would never sue me for that because we have all the evidence of this. She would never sue me for that because it was true. But they're playing games at this. Now, we have heard all sorts of rumors that there's an exodus from Region 2 and Region 1. Before I came here, I called, Darren Wade said the ferries are overbooked. They're full, the people are fleeing Region 1. Darren Wade never knows about these ferries. This ferry is always overbooked. If you go online, people complain all the time that they can't get a space on the Northwest Ferry. Secondly, I called Edgehill. He said the transport department, the traffic department said we have not seen anything unusual. Edgehill said to me, civil aviation has reported we don't have any unusual activities in terms of flight and traffic pattern. But they spread this rumor in our own country. Sometimes we spread rumors about what the Venezuelans are saying, and we wouldn't take the same effort to just go and post on when they spread their vile lies that Escubo belongs to us. Stop talking nonsense. Go and read the 1899 award. But we will spread the Venezuelan rumors more than we are prepared to defend our country. And it's not that people don't know. They know. We've had not one campaign. We've had several campaigns historically, starting from Burnham, almost every president. When I was president, we had brochures, we had everything else going out, talking to school. People know that this matter was settled definitively. They have the info, they can just post that. Instead, they spread the rumors. So we must not help here, locally, to raise anxiety in our people. Now, Venezuela, you have some wild people now, like this Delcia Rodriguez, wild people in Venezuela, and you can't put it past them to do anything. But we must not get into a state of panic and start feeding on ourselves. We are working strongly in the international community. We have friends everywhere. They're isolated. Nobody supports them for this action. Nobody supports them for the referendum or any action or aggression against Guyana. They're isolated on this matter. We're not the ones isolated. And so we need to ensure that nationally we really practice what we preach, not this sniping all the time. Obviously, Cathy Hughes thought she was doing this in Linden and then could spread the lie there. A total lie. They know it's a lie and try to undermine what we are hoping to achieve at the national level. I will just deal with maybe a couple of other matters. The president, I see this issue being raised again, and I said at an earlier press conference that the money that was given out to the public servants, that is from the cost of living adjustment fund, that wages and salaries have not been announced, for increases have not been announced for this year. The president shall do so, and that it will be retroactive. It has not been done. So people don't need to spread rumors about this matter. At some point in time, the president will announce it, and then it will be retroactive from January 1. There is a salary increase for 2023 to be announced. Next, we saw this fact-finding mission. Again, as you've seen yourselves, we are vindicated in not meeting with this group. That the group seemed to have had an agenda. I explored that at length last week about the agenda and connection with people like Burke and others who they're denying contact with, but they could not deny the contact with the opposition and being chaperoned by Roysdale Ford and the others. A fact-finding mission on the country being led or taken around by the opposition. And the fact of the matter that there are 3 consultations, one at Critchlow with Lincoln Lewis gang there, one in New Amsterdam up in the chamber Although it was supposed to be a town hall meeting, they shifted it upstairs in the chamber. And then in Linden again, where they wanted to give a PPP representative 1 minute to speak. 1 minute to speak. That it's clear now they were not here to fact find. They're here as part of the politics of the country. And I'm so pleased that our people on the ground, with great deal of credibility, debunk everything that they've said and demonstrated this. Gone are the days when you would have had to have 2 Indian persons defending the PPP in this area. Our teams were mixed and mainly Afro-Guyanese who live in these communities. They were not flown into the communities. They live the communities. They know the issues. They support the party. Some of them are members of the party. Some left APNU. A lot of them left APNU and came to us and found a welcoming space in our organization. And they pointed out how flawed this fact-finding mission was. Had this been done years back, you would have never had that sort of exposure of these the biasness of a fact-finding mission like this from the ground, from people who actually went on the ground. They did it with great deal of credibility. I just wanted to say this, something I returned to it. I saw the Ministry of Housing put out a statement, and I've already said to people that they have a lot of scams in the housing area. Many people have been duped, some of it by outsiders, but as the housing ministry said, any information people have about scammers there, you should just go report it to the police. Don't even go to the ministry. Carry it to the police and put it on social media. Of course, you don't want people to sue you, but if you're sure about it, put it on the social media. If you're sure about it. We don't have a problem with that because we'd investigate it too. So, because we have a huge task there, which is major. Let me repeat once again, because people can get a house lot immediately in this area if they had made an application before the year 2019. You don't have to pay anyone, you just have to go in. You can get your house lot allocated to you if you applied before 2019. I've explained this to you. I said that in opposition, we said we'll do 50,000 house lots in the 5 years. We have done 30,000 so far. That has allowed us to clear some of the backlog. But we still, if you have applied in 2020 or 2021 or 2022, don't come or don't go to the ministry. You're not going to get it now. So if you want to pay anyone, it would be illegal. It would be illegal for them to do that. To help you or say they can help you to get it if you apply only recently. You'd have to wait. We work on a system, and even the people who applied on the APNU, we didn't discriminate, because if you apply in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, you're still eligible, because we work based on the dates of application. So anyone who comes with a fantastic thing to you, I can help you get it, is committing an illegal act. To say you applied last week and you can get it now, that's a scam. That's a scam. But if you've applied before 2019, and when I've gone out, a lot of people don't know this. I was in North Haslington. I went to many communities in South Georgetown, Lane Avenue. And people came and said, oh, we applied since 2014. And they brought their document, and we sent them over immediately because they're eligible and they got through. You don't need to come to anyone or government official once you applied before that and you have your documentation. And as I said before, if anybody tells you otherwise, then they're scamming you. And but we have some professional scammers going around now. So any help to isolate them. I'll end the press conference there. Thank you. Yes, please.
Bring you back to the U.S. fact-finding mission yesterday Yesterday, two APNU operatives held a press conference, and Leon Saul, I think his name was, said that he can cite several cases where the government had discriminated when it comes to developmental works. However, when pressed, he couldn't actually prove this.
Yeah.
And they also said that they work with the U.S. delegation, but then distanced themselves when asked how they worked with them. Can you speak on this?
Isn't this Leon Saul, the guy who was at the Ministry of Housing? Was he at the Ministry of Housing under APNU? I think he was ex-Army and he was at the Ministry of Housing when we had all of those. In that period, they didn't develop a single house lot up to 2018. And then after the no confidence motion, they illegally spent some money and did about 3,000 lots, but didn't put in any infrastructure, just grade down the place. That's his track record. So I could show you that since we got into office, maybe 40 or 50%, I don't know the exact, but at least that of Afro-Ghanaians have benefited from house lots, over 10,000. In their entire period, they did 3,000 house lots. So when you talk about this is the same guy who would not, when you talk about housing and land allocation, I've dealt with that already. Just the APNU politicians and their families got large tracts of land. And no ordinary people didn't get. Tell him to go to Linden and talk about that, the Leon Saul and the others. But this is not new rhetoric. This is old, worn, same set of people over and over, old rhetoric. Nobody pays attention to them anymore. They didn't want Afro-Ghanaians to apply for scholarships. Now we have 21,000 people studying online. They can only lie to people. Leon Saul can go to Linden and hold a conference on discrimination and get more than 10 people, except if they bring the APNU people there. But they will go and bring in a delegation from Georgia and some Texas and somewhere else because they can lie to them. They don't live here. And when they bring them here, they surround them with these people, as we've seen here, who just give them one side of the story and never allow the other side of the story to come, as I just explained. So then it finds itself in some report. We're not going to be defensive on this issue any longer. We have made it clear, and people know now, that this party is the only multi-ethnic party in this country. It's demonstrated this over and over again and every day. We can demonstrate that. No other party can do that. No other party. The only multi-ethnic party with large numbers. We have more Afro-Guyanese supporters than the AFC total support. And they're supposed to be multi-ethnic, than their total support. So we're not defensive on this matter anymore. Our policies are clear to be looked at by real independent groups. But we're not going to do reverse discrimination too. We have a duty to take care of everyone. The indigenous people, Afro-Guyanese, the sugar workers who were left out and treated badly by the last government, we are assisting them. If you ever try to help a sugar worker, look at Ramjatan or APNU in the parliament. They go berserk. They go crazy. Oh, we're putting money into sugar, etc. You know, the same people, Sharma Solomon, complained to the visiting delegation, the fact finders, that they had to protest for electricity in Linden. And he didn't say that for 23 years under the PPP before 2015, and now again, that every year we spent upwards of $2 billion to subsidize electricity in Linden. Their electricity rates in Linden are 1/10 of what everyone else in Guyana pay in Georgetown and Berbice, everywhere else. This guy, he complains about this, but he didn't say we get a preference here. And it was done retained under this big bad PPP government. That preference, he wouldn't say that. But the fact finders wouldn't know because they give our people 1 minute to respond to all the allegations. Yeah, please. Oh, okay, sorry. You had the mic? All right, okay, I'll come back to you.
Rod Multilal, NCN. Dr. Jagdeo, about the international support. There is a view that CARICOM, for instance, is weighing its benefits from a relation with Venezuela. And so the calls have been for the maintenance of peace. Do you get the sense that there's a missing call for an outright condemnation, of the aggression from Venezuela?
I would refer you back to a statement made about 2 weeks ago, just before we sought the provisional measures before the ICJ. Could have been a bit longer, issued by CARICOM, cleared by all the heads, where it was very forceful. It spoke about the referendum, and it spoke about its illegality in terms of repudiation of the jurisdiction of the International Court, and it also condemned this attempt to annex our country. Very, very forceful statement from CARICOM. That was cleared by the heads. Now, sometimes people, in the spirit of goodwill, say, we want peace in our region. But I don't think that will affect the commitment of CARICOM countries and the leaders to support Guyana. They've expressed that support publicly and privately. And it is not going to be no amount of oil or economic diplomacy will change that support. We have had those assurances publicly and privately. But CARICOM has always urged dialogue. We have said we don't mind having dialogue. The president has said that. But one thing we're not dialoguing on is which Maduro wanted, that we must return to the good officers process, take the matter out of the ICJ. Having the Secretary General has already referred the matter to the ICJ. That matter will be pursued to its end at the ICJ. We can talk about everything else under the sun. Good neighborly relations, toning down rhetoric, tensions, etc. between the two countries. But we are not compromising on that one issue, which is our case before the ICJ. We're now returning to a bilateral process that didn't yield results for decades, although we pursued it vigorously. That is the good officers process, the UN Secretary General. So CARICOM would always urge that. And many countries, like I saw in Brazil, a statement came out, they said, dialogue or the international arbitration, as opposed to aggression. That is what people say. Peace and international arbitration versus aggression, unilateral moves to annex people's territory, to have imperialist ambitions against Guyana.
Rihanna, Kaicher News.
Sorry again. All right, go after Rihanna. Yeah, give him, yes, coming.
All right, you spoke about the past the relations you had with Mr. Chavez and Maduro. And as you said before, Brazil has been pushing for dialogue, either dialogue or arbitration. Given your past friendly relations with Venezuela and their leaders, do you see any dialogue that you can have to quell the tensions that we're having right now?
So it's not a personal thing, it is the country. We decided a long time ago that Venezuela will always be our neighbors. That we had our position on the border, which we are not compromising on, which is the finality of the 1899 award. But we still have to work together on improving people-to-people relationship, trade between our countries, generally to be supportive of each other as good neighbors. And it was that tone that we took with Chavez without compromising, and we were willing to take with any government. The same thing with Suriname. We do have a border issue with them, but we have had friendly relations with Suriname. You can go put these issues and beyond, and you don't have to heighten tensions surrounding this. So the dialogue now that we can have, in the face of this, if it's political, that is their objective in Venezuela, and going out and make these flourishing speeches now that they can't make about the economy or freedom in Venezuela, but they can do on the border. It makes them sound very patriotic, and they beat their chests around their country and stuff like that. Then I suspect they will now want to have a dialogue that tones this down, because they're profiting from it politically, profiting from the heightened tensions domestically by distracting people from some of the problems that they face domestically, by saying we have a common external enemy, which is Guyana, and therefore nationally we must all get together. So I don't know what scope there would be now for toning down tensions, but we're always open. The president has said that. It's open to such a dialogue, but one thing will not be discussed. That is stopping the process before the ICJ. That is something we will not compromise on.
All right, I
Yes.
have one more question. Guyana is one of the fastest growing countries in the world today, but the US dollar remains high. Do you, in your estimation, do you see it declining anytime soon? And given your economic background, do you have a prediction of when we will be able to pay off our debts?
Okay, so one, I've dealt with the debt situation in Guyana, and let me just repeat just the key elements of it. There was a time when our debt was 9 times the size of our economy. Before oil, in 2015, when we left office, it was 45% of GDP, from 900%. Today, it's about 22% of GDP, one of the lowest figures in the world. In that period when the debt was 900% of GDP, scheduled debt service was over 150% of revenue. Actual was just around 100%, 94% of revenue. That fell to about 10, 12% of revenue pre-oil, and now it's probably about 8% of revenue, 7, 8% of revenue. So we have one of the lowest debt figures in the world compared to the size of our economy. And we are using one of the smallest amounts of our revenue globally to service that debt. The debt is not a problem now. On the other hand, the rest of the region has gone now, on average, they're using over 60% of revenue to service debt. So you see direction there. There is our capacity to repay debt in the outer years, because of the lack of ring fencing, a lot more revenue will come in the outer years of our production. 2027 going up, you'd have larger sums of money. A single year revenue in 2027 would be equivalent, we will be able to pay off in 1 year revenue all of our debts, which is an unusual thing for a country in a single year revenue. So there is no need now. It's not a burden on the Treasury, and we have one of the best debt profiles in the world, not just the region, in the world. One of the best debt profiles. You talk to other countries that are struggling. In addition to that, we have only 2 loans so far that are variable rate loans. So we don't have to worry about globally escalating interest rates. And they're both to multilateral institutions. And our policy has been to contract fixed rate loans. So even the structure of the debt is such that it would not bring unwanted surprises in the future. So if global interest rate policy, like what happened, it moved from 0 to maybe 6% globally and caused bankruptcy, well, near bankruptcy in many countries because their debt servicing suddenly ballooned up because of the variable interest loans. That didn't happen in Guyana. And that will not happen because of how we are structuring our debt. So that's the first point. The second issue is that there is something called the Dutch disease. And that is when you have this resource windfall, it comes into your country, and because you have this influx of investments or revenue, it changes relative prices, including that of the currency. So the currency strengthens to the point where it makes your exports uncompetitive. Agriculture, manufacturing. Now we are trying to boost all 3 sectors. Tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, huge investments. You know the national investments as part of our effort to diversify the national economy and keep it diversified, unlike some countries that have relied when they get oil, they just rely on one sector. We are determined not to have that happen here. So we're not interested in a strengthening of the US dollar now because it will harm your economy immeasurably. And that is the Dutch disease. So you have to practice a monetary policy and fiscal policy that would allow you to ensure that you don't have unwarranted appreciation of the currency. So that is a deliberate policy of the government of Ghana. Yes, please.
Okay, good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo, Antonio de Stabrook News. I have a question. You had mentioned earlier that the opposition leader of Venezuela, you're hoping that she does not fall prey to what is happening with the referendum. But just to bring to your attention, last night the Jamaica Observer reported that Venezuela, according to the report, is that the opposition leader is lobbying.
Yes, I'm aware of what they're saying, but I'm saying that these are the people who are urging for, I believe, their part because they're worried about it being claimed they're not supporting a national referendum, that they're urging people to support a clause in the referendum, or particularly the one about ICJ, that repudiates international law. And they're the ones going around, the same opposition. And there is no one opposition. They have lots of people. So they have, but generally they support the referendum. They support the referendum. But then they're the same ones going around the world to ask for help in accordance with international principles and international law to ensure that the country goes onto a democratic pathway. So on one hand, you're trying to undermine international law, and then on the other hand, you're going to be running to the international community to ask for help to when you have trouble at home. So it is not that I'm aware of what they're saying. I'm aware of what they're saying, but I hope that they understand the implication of what they're saying.
Okay, just to touch on the oil and gas sector, I have two questions. One, have negotiations begun with block bidders, and when are these expected to be completed? That's one. And two, how and when will Guyana recover its 107 million US dollars in additional profit based on the findings of the IHS market?
So both questions should basically be referred to the minister, but from what I gather, all the parties that were awarded through the auction have been contacted and they're in touch with the ministry. I can't tell you how far the negotiations or the discussions have advanced because I don't get into the day-to-day issues, but as I pointed out to you, once those are completed, they will have to go, a paper would have to go to the cabinet to say, here is our report of the negotiations, and we recommend that cabinet give approval to conclude the awards with the following people or the following bidders. So that is how it will be approached. The other issue, we have to go forward based on the remedies provided for in the PSA, which is an export, I think, and then possibly arbitration. But the remedies are outlined in the PSA and could ultimately lead to arbitration. Yes. Yeah, yes, please, yes, go ahead. Yes.
So, Vice President, could you just elaborate a bit more on what steps Guyana will take to protect itself in the aftermath of the referendum? Say, for example, if Venezuela failed to abide by the provisional measures, should they be handed down by the ICJ? And secondly, sir, what would you say to Guyanese who are of the opinion that Guyana has not done enough to boost its military capability and capacity since the production of oil, and we've had all these resources?
Yeah, so first of all, I see this issue about, so let me deal with the latter question first. The Army has grown in Guyana's case, tremendously. I had cause, I saw from the opposition, some people saying we should build up our defense capability more. Our budget, the budget to the Army, I recall because I was Minister of Finance, the budget to the Army in 1990 was smaller than the salary of a single individual who was a consultant who was working in the foreign ministry. That was the capital budget of the Army. Go to the estimates of 1990. These are public documents, and you will see that. And then check. It's written up already because I said this before. I don't want to call the gentleman's name. He's passed. But see his salary, what it was. We have come from that period now, with the Army's budget growing by leaps and bounds. And that is in spite of the fact that we had to address this massive debt overhang, because we had to pay back over $2 billion of the debt. We got a significant amount restructured to and written off. So over the period, if you look at the growth in the Army's budget, it has been exponential, frankly speaking. We have recently started producing oil and gas. You said because we have had all of this money. So we've had all of this money. We recently started producing oil and gas. The fact of the matter is that we don't have a lot of money as yet. And I pointed out that in the 3 years, the first 2 years of the revenue was $650 million. And then this year, it's just about $1 billion coming into the budget. I pointed out that of that, the $1 billion coming into the budget this year, and that's practically all the money, which is 200 billion Guyana dollars, about $70 billion going to fund only 4 categories of social expenditure. Only 4 categories. We have since invested tens of millions of US dollars in capabilities. Each of those helicopters that we have now, I don't want to speak about this publicly, but cost us a significant amount of money. I saw they're spreading lies that some of the metal shark that we are buying is linked to some PPP people. It's not true. It was the U.S. Department of Defense that we spoke with. It's directly with the people. And we now, even with India, there's a line of credit for $100 million that we are pursuing additional vessels, not to fight war. Not to fight war. Our army was never built on fighting war or being aggressors. Defending our capability, defending our exclusive economic zone. That is what we are building a capability for. So people have to look at all of the efforts. I would say the Army has gotten more than its fair share of resources, given the constraints we have had in the past and in the recent time, even with the additional resources we've had. You've seen more and more dedicated to that effort. A lot of the defense of this country can't be open warfare with Venezuela. But that doesn't mean we have to, that's why we have to strengthen our diplomatic efforts, and they have been successful, and we have to work through defense cooperation with other countries. First of all, as a deterrent, because we don't want Venezuela to miscalculate as a deterrent, and then if they do miscalculate, we have a combined capability of dealing with this issue. But if you talk to every chief of staff from the beginning, since our army was established, you would know that Venezuela is a large army. Venezuela has a large army. They may have degraded capabilities now, but they have a massive, massive army. And therefore, we have to have that. So we are working to ensure that we can deter, first of all, that they don't miscalculate, that they coming here or trying to take any aggressive action will go unpunished. They're now isolated much more if they try anything. But we can't go into a state of panic too. Yes, please. Anyone else? Yes.
Yes, the Attorney General, in response to a question about Venezuela's refusal to recognize the court and accept the imminent ruling, said that this is a matter the Guyana government will have to address internationally. Could you say what exactly he might have been referring to?
Now, the thing is that we've seen Venezuela saying that. They're putting that to a referendum. But that will not stop the case from going forward, because we intend to pursue the case to the end. If they choose not to put forward a defense because, as we said before, they don't have a case, and I think they've done that analysis internally, that's their problem. We are pursuing this to the end and to a ruling. Now, fortified with a ruling now that puts the controversy to rest. Not the dispute, the controversy arising from their claim that the 1899 award was flawed. That fortified with that, then no law-abiding member of the United Nations, no law-abiding country would then ever fall prey to the lies that they're telling or can support them on this matter. Because you have a ruling from the ICJ, and the ruling came out after the matter was referred to by the Secretary General of the United Nations. Okay, thank you.